Hey, everybody, and welcome to How to Make Films and Influence People with Peter and Andrew, where we talk about our own approach to screenwriting and filmmaking, discuss great works of cinema, and blasphemously imagine how they could be remade. This week, we'll be talking about Pulp Fiction, giving an update on our current screenplay project that you, the audience, has been contributing to. But first of all, I'm Peter, successful filmmaker, film professor, screenwriter, and this is Andrew.
Filmmaker, screenwriter, but not a professional dancer by choice.
And we wanted to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. That's just passed. Don't know when you're listening to this, but I had a nice Thanksgiving with family. Andrew, how was your Thanksgiving?
Oh, it was great. You get family over, you eat good food, and I watched some movies, although not with all my family, I will say.
Okay.
This movie was more of a, not a family movie.
Did pull out Pulp Fiction with the little kids and whatnot. We're we're big on we like hosting for the dinner, but not overnight guests. So that worked out well. But we had about
Yeah.
19 people over, so it was a full
Did you have to
house.
rearrange your house?
We set up, we filled up the dining room, then we set up like a card table for the kids and sort of took shifts eating because we had enough table space but not enough chairs. So we sort of had the kids eat and then the adults eat.
Not enough chairs, yeah. Yeah, we have to push our couch all the way up to the TV to fit everybody in, but we do. That's good.
That's great. That's great. I always remember going to my cousin's house for Thanksgiving when I was a kid, and they were older and I didn't really play with them. So it was always a little bit boring, except they had a giant box of toys that was just the coolest box of toys. And every time I went, I just couldn't understand why I couldn't leave with the toys. I'm like, they're not appreciating them. I would appreciate them. Let me just take them home. And my parents never let me.
That's how it always is when you go to somebody else's house and they have toys that they're not playing with. And it's like, I would play with these every day. But, if you ever had them, you would get sick of them eventually. I mean, that's what it is for video games. It's like, you have this video game? I don't have this one. And you just sit there playing it the whole time. But then you're like, why don't I have this? And you go home, you're like, oh, I don't even play these games that I have and other people want them. So
Yep.
it's just what you don't have that you want, apparently.
Yep. There's some kind of life lesson there, but I won't learn it. I refuse to learn it.
No. Yeah, if I don't have it, I want it. So
The grass is always greener and it will stay that way.
it'll stay that way. It's not my fault.
Before we get into everything else, wanted to update on our script that we've been working on, the Reverse Robbery Project. Not going to be the actual name, but that's what we're still calling it. I think we're making some good progress on it. Little hiccup with Thanksgiving timing, as can happen, but we have a question about the project or about our writing, but it's coming in this week from Ted. Ted asks, let me see. Ted asks, I've started a lot of scripts and I never end up finishing them. How do you know when is a good time to just keep pushing through and finish the script that you started? How do you know when to give up and start something new? I think that's something that
Hmm.
a lot of writers struggle with. A lot of writers have to confront. Any thoughts on that, Andrew?
I would say your excitement about writing it is a big indicator of whether this is worth your time. I think there's a point of, I'm excited about this story and like getting it started can be hard and like going with it can be hard. But if you're writing a story and you look back and you're like, I don't like any of this, I'm not excited to write any of this, then yeah, maybe go for something else. But if there's anything there that's like a spark of like, oh, this really excited me. I had this idea. I really want to see this. Then I think it's worth it to just push through and see if it gets exciting again or if it's just a slug the whole way through. Maybe something else is better. There's something to be said of just finishing something and just seeing if it's good, especially if you've never done it. But if you've done it before and you're not interested, you're not excited about it, I think that's a good indicator. Time to move on. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, especially if no one's hired you to do it, you don't have a deadline for it. It's just something that you're doing because you're interested. If you stop being interested, there's something to that. I think this is part of why I am a big believer in writing outlines for scripts because I think
Mm.
That's something, to me, that's a big dividing line of, if I can finish the outline and I had interest and passion for it through finishing the outline, then I know the story works and I know I'm interested in the story. And I also know it's going to be difficult to actually write the script. But if I have that outline to go from, then I think it's important to just push through and work through the, you know, lack of enthusiasm on any given day, because you've spent enough time on this story and you know that the story works. And I think that's valuable to just push through, because often it's better to have an imperfect but finished script than a whole bunch of unfinished scripts that could have been perfect but you just never finished them. I think there is a real value in finishing something, but if you start outlining something and you just hit a roadblock, you don't know where the story's going to go, or you just lose interest in it. To me, that's sort of a natural time to say, let me move on to something else. But I like having that as kind of a dividing line. And then if I've done the effort to, and I've figured out where the story's going to go, I want to actually see it through to the end. And often I feel like some of my best ideas for scripts come when I'm supposed to be writing something else. And so, like, I'll try to make notes on what those ideas are, but not just, it's exactly that grass is green, grass is always greener idea, that
Right.
I'm sure if I just started writing this new script idea I had, then it would all come so easily to me. But if you actually spend the time to write that one, it'll also turn into work, because it's always work. But so I look at that outline as kind of the dividing line of, do I want to dedicate the time to this or not?
Right. There's because I feel like there's scenes like you might have an idea and be like, oh, this would be really fun to write this, and it's like, well, that's a scene or that's a couple scenes. It's a sequence of a movie, but a movie being 120 pages ish, right? Like that's a lot to put down. There's a lot to it, and there may be a section that you like. You're like, I just like this section of it, but I don't like the rest of it. And if that's the case, just change the scenes around, write what's interesting now. But a lot of times you're like, I have this idea for a movie. And it's like, do you have an idea for a movie or do you have an idea for like 20 minutes of a movie? You know? And that's a totally different thing than a whole movie. And so if I've written what I like what this idea is, then maybe it's going to be a little hard to flesh it out and figure out how to expand on it and how to make something bigger of it. But that can be worth the time. And you can find things you didn't know that are going to be interesting to you. It can go in a direction you didn't think it would go, and it can be fun. But oftentimes it takes a little bit of work and like just going for it, just doing it, even though it's hard until you break through.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And to your point about scenes, I do find that sometimes if I'm writing a scene and I'm just getting really bored with it, to me that's a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a little bit different than what you were saying, but just sort of, building off of that. If I'm writing a scene as part of a longer script and I'm just bored with the scene, I do look at that as a little bit of a red flag. Like,
Yeah,
is this scene actually important? Like, if it's not clear why this scene is here, if it's not clear what the characters are trying to accomplish, if it's not clear what the fun part of this scene is, then maybe that scene doesn't belong in the script, and or maybe I should really rethink what's going on there, because once you're doing the work of writing, it should be clear what the purpose of a scene is. And if it's not clear to you and you're just bored with it, I think it's going to be boring to a viewer too. And so that's something I think about.
that's a good point of like, should I stop writing the whole movie? No, but should I stop writing the scene? I mean, that's more likely of like, just stop the scene, do a different scene, and then pick up the movie somewhere else and see if you still like writing the whole movie instead of just abandoning the whole project because of a scene. Yeah, that's a good point.
Great, excellent wisdom from both of us. So
Yeah.
thank you, Ted, for your question, and please keep them coming, listeners. We want to keep you involved. We're going to get back into sharing the names for some of our characters, so look out for that poll. But we also just love talking about the screenwriting process, and that's part of what we're here to do. So thank you. And now, Andrew, we've had this Thanksgiving week, some time to have some turkey, watch some movies, watch some TV. watch some football if that's your taste. But what have you been watching this week?
Well, besides a lot of football, I did watch a movie called Being John Malkovich,
Oh,
which I had never seen. I'd heard throughout the years just crazy things about this movie. And I now understand why people just don't talk about this. Because how do you talk about a movie like this or explain it to somebody? You know, going in being like, I just don't know what this could possibly be about. And then watching this movie, I found it really funny, actually, like surprisingly funny, and a really interesting premise. And I guess I wouldn't be spoiling anything since this movie's been out for a while. But the idea is that these people get to go and be inside of John Malkovich for like 15 minutes at a time and experience his life through his eyes and his body. And it's like this really weird concept. And then there's a whole B story to it as well. But I thought it was like really creative and really well done, and with actors that you wouldn't expect to be in a movie like this. It was all very surprising, but in a really fun way that I thought was like unexpected in a really fun and good way. Where you're like, oh, that was cool. I did not see that coming. But you've seen this movie?
I've seen this movie. I haven't seen it in years, but it's I remember it just being so. I think that was it's Charlie Kaufman, right, who wrote it,
Charlie Kaufman wrote it, yeah. And then I
and
think it's
it was my first introduction to him. I don't know if that was his big breakthrough, but that was my first introduction to Charlie Kaufman.
yeah, he's an interesting writer too. That he always does stuff with like kind of internal mental psychological things. He did so this was 99. He did Eternal Sunshines in 2005. I think that was his like that's what he's known for, I think, as like his most famous movie. But yeah, very interesting way of like just the phrases that he would say like, you know, you're stopping my self-actualization as a man. Like these like phrases that are just they you wouldn't say in normal life, but they're all said very matter of factly, and it's like so funny to just see that in a script. Like people just go with it. They're like, oh yeah, of course, you know. It's like, oh, we're gonna go inside John Malkovich for 50 minutes. Oh, cool, I want to do that. Like, there's nobody who's saying like, no, that can't be true. You're crazy. Everybody just in this world just goes with it. And I think that's kind of fun because you know how in movies where it's like they have something fantastical that happens, and then you know it's going to be 15 minutes of somebody not believing it. And you're like,
Hmm.
oh, like I think they need it sometimes. Sometimes, like in this movie, if you just skip that part and everybody just gets on board, because you, the audience, saw it, so you already know what happens. It's like, well, that's also really fun. And do you need that part of the movie where people don't believe you? I mean, it depends on the story, but here they didn't do that, and I thought it was really fun to just get right to the fun part, the action.
That's really good point, and the it's a good testament to also how in movies they have to follow their own logic, their own rules of the world of that movie, but it doesn't need to follow the normal rules of life. And so I think that's like we're going to set up how this whole thing works, but then within this world, people just accept that this is reality, and it's got some funny like little quirks and then also giant premise. I mean, the whole
Yeah.
premise of going into John Malkovich, it's also like the seriousness of the relationships is then it gives a whole it's not just a fun quirky movie, it's got this real gravity to it, but then
Oh
it
yeah.
also has the little quirks of like we're going to be on an office floor that's just like a half of an office floor,
Yeah.
and the idea that marionettes is this high like the highest form of art.
Yes. Yeah. The more you think about it, you're like, and that too. And then there's this. Like, it just adds up to like, how did they this one thing on top of another, and yet somehow it's all like, yeah, that's just the world they live in, you know. But they make it
that's a
work.
that's a good one.
Yeah.
Would you recommend it to everyone, certain people? How would you couch that?
I would recommend the movie. I think it was really funny, and if you haven't seen it, I think it's worth a watch. Like I really enjoyed it, surprisingly.
Great, great. I went to the theaters this week and watched Zootopia 2,
Ooh,
which is I I feel like I feel like I'm always thinking about Zootopia whenever we're thinking about how a movie could be made into a kids movie because
It's the perfect thing.
Zootopia is really just an adult. It's like Chinatown, but we're gonna make it with animated animals. It's a very adult story, and Zootopia 2 keeps up with that. It's a very, I mean, it's just sort of a murder mystery thriller that, but but done with fun little cute rabbit and fox, and so it's a really, I mean, I guess a lot of kids movies kind of have an underlying story that's not that different from an adult movie, but Zootopia and now Zootopia 2, it really is, I mean, you would not have to change much except for the fact that it's animated animals and it would suddenly be an adult mystery. And
Like a PG-13 adult movie.
yeah, yeah, I mean, there's some murders, there's some peril and danger. It really is just on a story level, that's 100% what it is. But it is fun. I saw it with my kids. They really enjoyed it. I feel like Zootopia 1 combined that kind of story with I found some really funny scenes with
Yeah.
the elephant doing yoga and the sloths in the DMV, and which I
Right.
found very funny on top of just the cuteness of the story. Zootopia 2, I felt like didn't quite have the same humor, or not the same humor, like high points as that.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I think as a diversion to see with kids, I think it's great, and I think it's a reasonable story. I don't think it rises to the heights of Zootopia 1, but I think you could do worse if you have to watch a movie with your kids.
Yeah. There's got to be worse movies out there. Zootopia 1 I thought was really fun. My kids just watched that this weekend. I guess maybe they're preparing for number 2. I don't know if they know it's out. But when Disney does the live action remake of these movies, maybe they should just go all out and like get real actors and make it a PG-13.
Just
I mean, that could work.
violent shootouts and stuff.
Yeah. Like Chinatown. That's like
Yep.
they the reference, like comparing it to Chinatown. I'm like, yeah, that actually is very similar to what this what that story is. Like it could work.
So a definite recommendation for Being John Malkovich, a qualified recommendation for Zootopia 2, depending on who you're going with. But I think we've been watching some good stuff. And we'll be right back after this.
You know what the best part of Christmas is, Peter?
Eating Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream?
That's right, and their new Christmas flavors are now in stock.
You mean I can eat Silent Ice, Holy Ice whenever I want?
Well, just during the Christmas season, but yeah,
What about I'm Dreaming of a White Chocolate Christmas or Rudolph's Red Velvet Nose?
there's no better way to celebrate the season.
I know what my kids are getting for Christmas this year.
A freezer full of Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream?
Nothing else would make them happier.
Dunkin' and Bliss Christmas flavors are now available because nothing says the holiday spirit like a cold carton of joy.
And we are back. Let's get into the movie of the week, Pulp Fiction. What can you tell us about Pulp Fiction, Andrew?
Pulp Fiction, 1994, directed by Quentin Tarantino. A burger-loving hitman, his philosophical partner, a drug-addled gangster's moll, and a washed-up boxer converge in this sprawling, comedic crime caper. Their adventures unfurl in 3 stories that ingeniously trip back and forth in time. And I feel like most people are aware of Pulp Fiction, at least culturally speaking. Even if you've never seen it, you know what it is. I know my wife had never seen it, and so I had her watch it with me. And she's like, "Oh yeah, I recognize that scene. Oh, that's what that scene's from. Okay." And like all the references in this movie, I feel like this movie was a big deal when it came out, which I didn't see it when it came out. I would have only been 7 years old, so and not really a kids movie. But I think this watching it, I've seen it a couple of times, but watching it again, the way that this story develops and he writes these characters, I almost like watching this movie think, I don't know that there's another movie that is comparable to this movie, even when I think of other Tarantino movies. This is just such a unique way to tell a story and unique stories in general that I don't know how you even compare this to something else. I was really kind of like thinking about like this is just such a one-off, like a unique experience of a movie when you watch this. What did you think when you were watching
Yeah,
it?
I mean, and I think in terms of that uniqueness, I do think the nonlinear storytelling is really unique in Pulp Fiction, which I think does differentiate it from almost anything I've seen, and even from, if I think of Reservoir Dogs or uh, Inglorious Bastards or other Quentin Tarantino movies, he plays with cutaways and flashbacks and a little, I mean,
Right.
which is all part of this nonlinear storytelling. But I would say often there still is a linear story moving forward in time, and then we're going to cut away to different things. But in Pulp Fiction, it really is multiple different timelines taking place. You're cutting back and forth, but you don't realize that you don't, they're not tracking exactly chronologically. So the person who might die in one timeline is still alive in another timeline,
Right.
and comes, he appears on screen after having already been killed in a different timeline, or things like that. So I think it's really interesting. There's another movie, Bad Times at the El Royale, that I think owed a
Yeah.
lot to Pulp Fiction, which played a lot with that nonlinear storytelling. But again, that was a little bit more, we're going to tell the story in order, and then we're going to show it from a different perspective, which is another approach. But Pulp Fiction, in terms of really, we're going to have these overlapping timelines, I think that's a really interesting idea that would be, and I'm not sure how he wrote it, but it would be interesting to think like, did he write it with a general conception of what the story was going to be, and then write out each of those storylines and then sort of intercut them? Or did he write out, from the beginning, just scene by scene, how they were going to cut in with each other? I'm not sure exactly what his approach was, but that would be interesting to know how he approached writing Pulp Fiction.
Because the movie is so well detailed. I've heard that he writes really long scripts and then kind of finds the story within the world. Because in this, I think in all his movies, but in this one too, you get this sense of like he knows what this world is. Like every detail of every scene is just the world. The rooms are so filled in. That's what I kind of like a lot about this movie in particular. Everywhere you go, whether it's somebody's living room or the house, you go to the diner, you go to somebody's apartment, like it's all every detail on the wall, in the house, everywhere you go, like it's all meant to be there. Like he thought, what how does this person live? What would they have here? How would they live? And it's all there. So it feels very real and very grounded. Like this is a real place that I know exists, even though nothing in this would actually exist in real life. Like it's all a little too far fetched to be a real life story. But that's but it makes it fun because you feel like it could happen, and the way that he writes this and like all the things the characters say and do and just the world feels so lived in that I feel like it's really easy to just get in it and feel like the story is a real story that could actually take place.
Yeah, yeah. It's like there's a much bigger universe that he's created, that he's just
Yeah.
chosen to choose, to tell these stories in. Um, and I guess just to break it down a little, in these timelines we have, uh, there are two thieves who are in a diner, and then they rob the diner. I guess they're called Pumpkin and Honey Bunny. Then we have Vincent Vega and Marcellus Wallace's wife, which is the John Travolta character and the Uma Thurman character, and he's supposed to take her out on a date, or he's supposed to watch her for Marcellus Wallace, who's the big gangster,
Hmm.
and then that sort of turns into going out to a restaurant. Then there's Vincent Vega and his partner, who is, what's his partner's
Samuel L.
name?
Jackson.
Samuel L. Jackson, Jules. So Samuel L. Jackson's character Jules, and they have to also, uh, they are going to they're going to
The brief.
collect the briefcase that Marcellus Wallace needs. That a group of young men has kind of have they stolen it?
They have it. They got it.
They have
I don't
it.
understand the backstory of that one. They somehow have it, and they need to get it from them, and they weren't supposed to have it.
Yeah,
That
there's
becomes
something
very
like
clear.
that.
They did something
Somehow
wrong.
they sort of took advantage of Marcellus Wallace and stole this briefcase, and now Jules and Vincent need to get it back. So there's that whole storyline, and
Mm.
so we're already seeing Vincent is both in that storyline and he's in the storyline with Uma Thurman's character, and then there's a whole other situation with the Bruce Willis character, who's a boxer who was supposed to throw a fight, but he ended up winning, having placed massive bets on himself, and then but but the whole thing, it's like now Marcellus Wallace is hunting him down because he was supposed to throw the fight, but then also the guy that he beat in the boxing match has died in the ring, and it's this whole crazy scenario. So it's basically we have all of these different storylines that are interesting in and of themselves. Then we have the fact that they're all sort of overlapping in this universe. And then with each of these storylines that have their own sort of interesting premise, things go wrong. And they go wrong in sometimes, you know, funny ways, sometimes absolutely insane ways. But I mean, each one of these stories could be the whole premise of a movie, but it's like six different stories jammed into Pulp Fiction.
It's crazy that it works when you think about it like that. Like, what is this about? It's about all these different stories. They all have something in common. There's always a person that's, there that from you've previously met. But like the fact that he was able to make this work, you wouldn't think this would work the way it does. Like if you saw this as a script before it was a movie, you would probably have notes of like, I don't know, I think this is a lot to throw at an audience. Like I don't know that this is going to work. And it just does so well. Like it's so well done that it's really crazy that he had somehow got the ability to do that. I guess he'd had hits before, and they were like, "Okay, we're going to let you do this," and that he knew how to piece it all together to make this story. Like that's what's really crazy is that he knew how to work it, how to put it, when to show each story, because you do get like you don't even have that Bruce Willis story until an hour into the movie. And it's like a no, totally new character. And the story before that is just so good. You're like, am I really going to see something as good as I just saw? You're setting up something completely new. It kind of like the momentum kind of stops there for a minute while you set up the Bruce Willis story. You have another guy come in. Oh, what's his name? Christopher Walken.
Oh
He
yeah.
comes in with the watch and it just talks. And like that's that whole thing is funny too, to set up your next storyline. And you're like, how does this relate to anything I've just watched? And you're like, well, you just have to go with it. And that's kind of how he does, like he writes. Because when he's, you'll pick up a scene in the middle of a conversation that they're having. And you're like, what does this conversation have to do with anything? But if you just sit with it and you just listen, you'll find out, oh, this is what it has to do with the story. This is what it's leading to. And it's almost like he's leading you without telling you where you're going. And you just have to have faith and trust that he is taking you somewhere that you want to go. But he kind of like that in and of itself, I think is a hard ask on an audience, but he does it so well. Like everything does pay off that by the time you get like 20 minutes in, you're like, okay, like I'm on board with this. I know he's going to lead somewhere interesting, even if these conversations, I don't know how they're connecting to anything, but they are interesting conversations themselves, like the quarter pounder with cheese conversation. You're like, I don't know, what does this have to do with anything? But it's also funny, and then it does come back around. So it's really creatively done that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of what makes this so appealing is that you have these big storylines and this idea of Pulp Fiction. It's, we're going to, it's not a thoughtful drama. We're going to be big, splashy, spectacular action. That's kind of the idea of Pulp Fiction, historically. But this is, so there are these big premises, and we have all these crazy action, and a drug overdose, and a shot of adrenaline, and
Mhm.
crazy acts of violence, and all sorts of different things happening. And I think because of the intensity of that action and the stakes of all that, then the conversations that they have is such an interesting counterpoint. And
Yeah.
I think that a lot of movies, this has a lot of copycats. I think there was just a wave of movies in the mid 90s through till today. I think a lot of people just want to make a new version of Pulp Fiction, or they're influenced by this kind of film. And I think partly that's just a natural, it's a great film and you loved it, so you want to make something like that, and I think that's natural. But I also think there's an element of like, well, if we have a couple shootouts and then we have a lot of just talking about stuff, that's the
Mhm.
secret sauce that Quentin Tarantino figured
Right.
out. And so, like, I can write a bunch of people just talking about stuff and then have some guns. And I think uh, that kind of copycat formula did not yield very many good films. And I
Yeah.
think there are a lot of films that are just really weaker versions of this that are playing on that, not realizing how much story there is in Pulp Fiction, and how
Yeah.
much we get invested in these characters and how much happens. And I think everybody just thinks about the Big Mac conversation and thinks that that's what it was special about the movie. I
Yeah.
think they're missing so much.
It's not. It's that these conversations they're having, like, are on theme with what the movie's about, even if they're not brought up. Like, you talk about it again. Like, I was thinking about how. So they have this whole conversation with how one of Marcellus's guys gave Mia, his wife, a foot massage, and they have this whole conversation about whether that should be allowed. And he threw this guy off a 4-story building. Was that too far? Should he have done that? And that they kind of come to this conclusion of, like, it did cross a line. Like, it is an intimate thing that he did, but did it warrant that as a result? Probably not. But then you have Vincent goes on this date with Mia, and he's not supposed to. It's just like he's supposed to take her out and have a good time because Marcellus is out of town. But this whole time they're on this date, they keep crossing these little lines of intimacy. Like, they share a straw, they have an awkward like an awkward pause. She ends up wearing his coat when they come home. They dance. It's like all those things, like, on their own, not a big deal, but it's kind of in the same theme of a foot massage. Is that crossing the line? Did he cross a line with all these things, even though it's never brought up as that? And I think so these conversations are weaved in and out, and the themes are there, and you see the themes continue to play out in these stories, even if you might think that conversation was just kind of a one off or just kind of there as like a side thing. Like, it actually is part of the storytelling. I think it's really well done that he can do that without you realizing what's going on. And so you almost think he's just telling cool stuff and then showing cool things, but it's all related.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another thing that I had never noticed before this watching of it, but there's, I won't get too graphic with it, but there's a scene where, so when Jules and Vincent go to confront the men in their apartment, to get the briefcase back, they're sort of challenging them, and and it there's this line about, I'll put it this way, but it's like, Marcellus Wallace doesn't like being taken advantage of,
Yes.
and he doesn't want to be taken advantage of, and that really ends up actually foreshadowing some things that happen later in the film that,
Right.
like, I had never connected, because it just flows off the tongue as Jules is
Right.
saying this as a way to taunt the men, but it actually perfectly foreshadows something that happens later in the film. And it's
Comes back.
like, and I think that's what's so interesting about this film, that it's like, it's so violent, it's so obscene in some ways, but done so expertly. And I
Hmm.
think it's I mean, in some respects it reminds me of Shakespeare, which, Like, not, I mean, it's hard for me living in this century to look at Shakespeare as anything but just rarefied and very, this is old fashioned language and this is, a classic.
Mhm.
But a lot of Shakespeare, when it came out, was very bawdy and very, of the people and very sort of rough and, very, very smart. But there was a lot of sex humor and all sorts of like dirty jokes and things that was
Right.
incorporated in, and super violence too, that was incorporated into Shakespeare. And I think, am I saying that Quentin Tarantino is better than Shakespeare? Well,
Maybe.
I'm not, but if anyone is going to be, this
Yeah.
is, it's not as crazy a comparison as it might seem.
That's a good point. Because when I think this movie really benefits from rewatching it, because I had seen it a couple times before, but like when you watch it again and you kind of know the story, you can pick out those details that you missed before, like how these two things are related that you didn't see were related, and the connections across all three stories, and how something that's set up that was fine, like that whole conversation in the apartment where they have with the boys when they take the briefcase, like that's good on its own. And then it's like, but it also works as a connection to this thing that happens later in the movie, which just adds another layer on top of it. And so I feel like this movie is just so many layers, and that the more you watch it, the more you can connect to how these things were set up that you didn't notice, because you don't need to notice it. You don't even need it to have a setup. But the fact that it does is like, this is so well done that it's really, really impressive. I just left after watching it, like, this might be one of the best things ever made. Like, it's incredible how he was able to do this.
Yeah, I first saw it on TV, probably like TNT or something back in the day on like basic cable, and I thought it was pretty good. Only years later did I realize that they'd cut out about a third of the movie. So
It was
it's
like an hour-long movie.
whole plot lines just missing. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
that this is a it's I think it doesn't. I don't know if they're the edited for TV version of this. I
You just can't, doesn't work.
I feel like this is a film where you just need to know the kind of content that's in it, because if you're up for it, it's an amazing film, and if you're not up for it, then an edited version is just not going to work. It's just watch
Yeah.
something else.
You either watch it as is or not at all. And
Yeah,
if you're shy for, yeah, extreme violence, a lot of language, yeah, this might not be the movie for you.
yeah, yeah. There's also something that I was struck by, which is the the way in which this film had an influence on on other filmmakers. And it's interesting to me that it came out in 1994, which is the same year that, well, Forrest Gump won at the Oscars that year. So this was nominated along with Forrest Gump, Four Weddings and a Funeral. Uh, let's see, Quiz Show, and the Shawshank Redemption. So pretty good year, I would say. Pretty good year for the Academy Awards. Shawshank Redemption, Quiz Show. We don't talk about it as much, maybe, but that was a really good one. Uh, Forrest Gump. I mean, I remember there being a lot of people
People
upset that
love
Forrest
that
Gump
movie.
had beaten Pulp Fiction, and I think that Forrest Gump is. I mean, I think Pulp Fiction is a more important film, but Forrest Gump was a cultural moment. I think there's a lot to be
It
said
was
for Forrest Gump.
the time it came out. Forrest Gump was just everything. Like, if it came
Yeah,
out now, there's no way it would stand up against Pulp Fiction. It just had its moment at that time for whatever reason.
yeah. Um, and kind of interesting that both Pulp Fiction and Four Weddings and a Funeral, these two, like that. I mean, that was sort of the heart of that kind of '90s indie film era.
Hmm.
When, I mean, Pulp Fiction was not his first film. There was a little bit more money behind it, but it was still Miramax. It was coming out of it was not like a big studio making it. It was very uh, transgressive and kind of coming from um, not sort of the established Hollywood. And Four Weddings and a Funeral, even smaller kind of independent film, English, so a little bit different. But that was such a big era. And as a film professor by choice, I feel like so many people wanting to make films nowadays in 2025 are still caught up in the 1994 era of independent film. That like
Mm.
their idea of what it would be to be an independent filmmaker is still so shaped by that era of what it was to be an independent filmmaker. And I think both that's a testament to what a big impact those films had, but also kind of sad in that times have changed and it's just not the same world as 1994.
Yeah, they're kind of like mid budget. Like Pulp Fiction was $8.5 million budget. It's like, do they really make movies at that size nowadays? It's almost like it's either these huge things or it's as small as possible. And there's all these movies that are like that they just don't get made anymore.
I mean, that might not be that different from Anora, which won Best Picture
Oh, that's
last
true.
year, but which is also sort of an anomaly.
Yeah,
Um, but
it's coming back around.
$6 million budget for Anora. But I think that is an anomaly. I think there was a time when in the mid 90s when these films came out. But that leads me to this idea. Another film that came out in 1994 was Clerks, which
Yeah.
launched Kevin Smith into the world. And I think both Pulp Fiction and Clerks have launched a million different imitators in different ways. And I think both of them and I think both of them, that's a mistake. Like, I don't think that the imitators of Pulp
They should
Fiction
not be
and the
imitated.
imitators of Clerks are ever very good. And kind of for different reasons. I think Clerks is not much of a movie, but it's sort of it's clever, witty screenwriting, clever, witty dialogue by Kevin Smith, which most people are just not able to write as witty as him. And then also it was the novelty of we've never quite seen a film like this before. Well, now we have, and now like there just isn't the same appetite for another film like that when there isn't the underlying interesting story. And so I think if you're copying Clerks, you end up having a movie where basically nothing happens and it's just people talking and it's not going to be as witty as Kevin Smith. And Pulp Fiction talked already about the copycats, but I think it's almost the opposite of Pulp Fiction is so well crafted, but I think a lot of people copying it just don't appreciate how well crafted it is, and so they think that copying it will be a really easy endeavor, and it just doesn't work out that way. Sometimes there's
You
some fun
froze for a
movies.
while.
What's that?
You froze for a while.
Oh,
You got to go back to it. Like paused right after you talked about Clerks. Just go back into you talk about Pulp Fiction.
okay.
Yeah.
So, and Pulp Fiction had a lot of copycats, but I think a lot of those copycats didn't appreciate how well crafted Pulp Fiction was. And I think that, as I said before, there are a lot of films that just tried to combine some shootouts with a lot of talking about stuff, and they're just missing how smart Pulp Fiction actually is. And I think Clerks worked, but it was actually very simple and kind of a novelty. Pulp Fiction worked because it was so smart and so well crafted. And I think either one, you just can't really copy it well. And I think that's where so many movies have failed. Some of them are fun. I remember a film called The Way of the Gun with Ryan Phillippe. It was okay, but it was basically just a ripoff of Pulp Fiction. And I mean, there's so many films like that. And I think that there are it had such a big impact on the film world, but but not like sudden. But it's tough to have an impact that is then based on the maybe genius of Quentin Tarantino or the ability of Quentin Tarantino, if we don't want to call him a genius. But like so much of that film worked because he did it so well. And I don't think that there's a formula to Pulp Fiction that somebody else could just pick up and run with.
You can't copy that. Even if you get rid of the whole novelty idea of it all, like just beneath it is so much talent and technique, and there's so much to it that you can't just copy his style and hope that that's what people were drawn to. It's like it's more than just the style, it's more than just how they talk, it's more than just a shootout, it's how everything is connected together. And that I don't think people were able to do because that's just Tarantino. He is just that's how he sees the world. He's a very unique person, and the way that he tells a story is so unique that nobody has been able to copy it and nobody can do it. And like thinking about like his great movies, which I have seen all of his movies, and this one just stands out as such a good film. Um, but he didn't win like any awards for this at the time. It was just so new. I feel like people couldn't recognize, in '94. If this came out now or later, you like looking back, you'd be like, if I could redo 1994 Academy Awards, like obviously this would win. You would think. Um, I mean, there'd be arguments other way, but like he should have. I think he won Best Screenplay, which as well, but he's never won Best Director for anything. His movies have never won the best film of the year. It's like if you think of all of his movies, like this should have. It feels like, and it should have been recognized. But I guess as like culturally speaking, it's just so relevant. And I feel like if you know anything about Tarantino, you know this movie, even if you've never seen it. That not many movies do that. So I think that says something as well. Just that the last hour, the way that he changed culture, the way that so many people copied what he tried to do and just couldn't do it and realized you can't do it. That's a very unique thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And um, yeah, and I think it's interesting that I'm not sure that any of his other films have risen to the same unique strengths of Pulp Fiction. I mean, I think there's a case to be made for different strengths of different films, and I think it's great that he has just continued making films. But
Hmm.
I think it's also possible that this just was his best very early on.
Yeah, there's a lot of hype leading up to his potentially last movie coming out,
Yep.
whenever that comes out. It's like, well, but they're all good. I like them.
Now, in Pulp Fiction, which storyline did you latch on to the most, or which character or characters did you like the most? Like, if you were gonna either just on sort of a personal connection, or if you were gonna think of this as, who's the main character of the film?
Hmm.
Obviously, the film's all fragmented. You can't really say that, but who would you latch onto?
I found myself enjoying the story with Vincent and Mia the most, even though there's not a lot of action in that story. Like he goes to pick her up on the date, they go out to this diner, they dance, and then eventually she ODs, and then that's kind of an exciting moment at the end there. They're like, we're not going to tell Marsalis about this, but like the whole thing is very. It's a lot of talking. It's a lot of subtext. It's a lot of like what's going on behind the scenes and what are they both thinking and what are the implications of everything that's going on. But this time around, at least, I found that was the most interesting storyline for me, and I would have watched another hour of that. I just felt like I wanted like that whole. He set up that whole world, that their lives so well. I really wanted to see more of that. What was the one for you?
I mean, you can't go wrong, but I guess I like the Bruce Willis storyline, and I think
Mhm.
I mean, to some extent, he rides off into the sunset at the end, even though that's
Yeah.
not the end of the movie. It is kind of like, and I think that's an interesting thing about the nonlinear aspect of the film, that it really does end with the character riding off into the sunset, but or maybe it's sunrise, but it's or off into the sun, but it's that's sort of the uh, there's something about him as just kind of a heroic character in a way. I think most of the main characters are very interested in living by a code. And I think it's
Mhm.
interesting with all of the crime and all of the violence and drugs and all of the stuff that happens in the movie. It seems like it's a recurring theme that it's important to these people. What rules do you live by? What is important to you? And that's comes up with the Bruce Willis character with the the watch that is has this
Mhm.
value to him. It comes up with the John Travolta character with in terms of how he what does he owe to Mia, what does he owe to Marcellus, and how is he going about that? It certainly comes up with Jules, who talks about
Yes.
his desire to be a good man, and I think that's such an interesting layer of complexity in the film that is on a surface level, the film is just so violent, and you think it's just sort of this crass, pulpy kind of thing. But I think there is a lot of interest in what does it mean to be a good person, and especially if you're living a life of crime, how do you still within that world try to be a good person?
Even the Pumpkin and Honey Buddy, they had the "We don't want to kill anybody." Like they even had like a line they had drawn with
Yeah.
their acts. That is an interesting point. That everybody is they've got this way that they do live by, and that's kind of what's so interesting about the story is you have like this person's not going to cross this line, and then they're going to act with somebody else who has this code, and then they're going to act with somebody who has this code, and just how they go about like how would they interact with each other when they come up against each other, who's going to give in and how is this going to play out. And that's like an underlying like really interesting part of the story is how he sets that up. Kind of what everybody is and isn't willing to do, what they are afraid of, what would be crossing the line for them. Even when they go to the drug dealer's house, he's like, you can't bring her here, like no one's going to die in my house. And like the idea of somebody dying on his floor is motivating to him. You're like, oh, that's too far for him. He only sells the drugs. He doesn't want anybody being here that's ODing on the drugs. And like all of these different things, it's always putting somebody in a situation that they don't want to be in. And he's so good
Hmm.
at that. Like he sets up just almost like you don't even realize what he's doing. And you just know this is the person, this is who they are. And then a situation comes about and you're like, oh, they don't want to be in this situation. And he doesn't have to tell you that explicitly. He's just set it up so that you understand that is what's going on. And I feel like that gives it a lot more tension to these scenes. And you think, like, if you didn't know better, you would just say, they just talk and then a shootout, that's going to be dangerous for everybody. But no, like, he set up this specific scene for this specific character because it attacks personally what they believe and personally what they don't want to do. And that's why he puts them there, like, in that specific way.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. Um, I think we've been really positive about this film, but it makes me wonder, what would you say are the weaknesses of the film? If you would say, things that, if you were to criticize it, what would you criticize? Maybe, you know, problems that you do see with it or things that it could be better. It's hard for me to say things that could be better because
Yeah.
you don't want to mess with, even if there are problems with it, it's kind of, you don't want to mess with the recipe. But I think there could still be criticisms of the film. Um,
If you're looking for something, I think you could say the pacing of the whole movie. Like it is a little like stop and go sometimes, where you're really invested, and then it kind of like halts everything, sets stuff up, and then you get going again. Like that could be a criticism maybe. And then the idea of the multiple storylines being hard to follow, especially on a first watch. Like with my wife watching it for the first time, I had to tell her a few times like who this person is and where we saw them last and why they're doing this, just to like catch her up on the story because it is kind of hard to follow unless you've seen it before. I mean, those are,
mhm.
if you had to pick something, what do
The
you
one
think?
thing I hesitate to even bring it up because I feel like, well, I don't know. I think I well, I guess the issues that I would have, I think that there's some, it's just so extreme with some of the graphicness of things that I don't think that's really a criticism though, because I think the part of the point of the movie is that it's going that far. So
Yeah.
I don't think that's really a fair criticism, but I think it is also it's sort of having its cake and eating it too, in the sense of it's it's being a smart movie that's playing with these like exploitation movie, sort of really grungy, obscene movie tropes, while being really smart about it. But I think the scene in the basement of the store with Marcellus
Mhm.
Wallace and Butch, it's like that's a little. I mean, I don't know. It's not. I think you could say it's
It's a
not a
little
fair
gratuitous.
criticism, but I think you it's a little bit having it both ways with that.
Hmm.
I also think the casual racism is like of all the
That's true.
different things in the movie, it's like
If
that's
you lost that, would you be losing much?
I
Like,
don't
would
think
it?
you would lose anything, and that's why I would say that's my number one objection in
That's
the
a good
film.
point.
I think you would lose nothing, and it's like is it believable that that character is racist? For sure, but
Yeah,
like that we see that character for one scene. Did we need to have that level in the
that
movie?
level of racism. That is a good point. It's like I don't know if that was when this movie came out. If that was just part of the like extremeness of it, and like nowadays we're like we get it. You know, I don't know. It's hard to know when it came out. If it meant more or if that casual racism was more integral to the story. But now it doesn't seem like it really adds anything. Like if you were to lose it, it wouldn't take that much away, if anything.
I mean I think yeah, I don't know if that is I don't I would hope that it's not Quentin Tarantino just like trying to get out his racist urges in that scene. But I think if it is trying to be just extreme, I think that is something I think you could definitely argue you shouldn't touch anything about the Marcellus and Butch scene because that just is part of the movie. You need that even in as graphic as it is. I think that the racism, it's like I I would be hard pressed to say that that's an important part of the movie.
It's not like he does Django Unchained later. You're like, I understand the racism in this movie. That is essential to the storyline of this movie. But like in Pulp Fiction, it's really not essential to anything. It does add another level to the extremeness of it. And maybe that's what he was going for. I don't know. But that's a good point.
But other than that, I mean, I think the movie it's a good movie. I would not recommend it to many well I guess I would just stand by what I said before. I think you have to be on board. I think you should read like the parent advisory of what's in the movie, just like get a
Yeah,
sense for what's in it. And if you were not on board with that, then
it's
just
not.
move on and watch. There are other good films to watch, so I
You don't.
wouldn't recommend it to everybody, and I wouldn't recommend an edited version because I think you just lose too much. But I think if you're okay with the content, then I think it's an amazing film.
Hmm. Absolutely. I'm after like I've seen it a few times. After this past viewing, I'm like, this may be one of the best movies ever made. That's just where I stand with it now. And so I'm like, if you are okay with this type of graphicness in a movie, then yeah, you got to see it. Really recommend it. But obviously not for everybody.
All right, now with that said, if Hollywood wanted to remake this movie and they wanted to do it, let's say, as a kids movie or a family movie, how
Family
would
friendly.
you approach that? What would
So I was
be
thinking about how to make this family friendly. So you have three storylines, which I think you can kind of play off this. You have the one where they go and they get the briefcase, and like just at its core, there's nothing family friendly about that whole situation. You have the Mia and Vincent scene with the drug overdosing, like that. You can't really make a family friendly drug overdosing movie. Then you have the Butch boxing scene sequence. It's like you could kind of start that. Like this is where you would go because you have the watch and you have this great backstory of how this watch was his great grandfather's in a war, his grandfather's in a war, his dad's. Then it got passed down to him, and that's like this meaningful thing to him, and he acts on honor according to what his ancestors would have done. I think you could kind of with that premise, you could take this idea of a boxer and who's supposed to throw a fight for whatever reason. He's down on his luck. You can give him a family and kids or something, and then he decides not to because his parents, his grandparents wouldn't have appreciated him just not living by this code of honor that they did, and then you could kind of go somewhere else with it without the the Marcellus in the basement scene. You'd have to cut that. But I feel like that beginning of a story, I feel like you could really go somewhere family friendly with that that idea.
Yeah, that's a great idea, actually. The idea of if you take one of these storylines, and I think that would be a good one, and just make that movie, but make that like the attachment to the watch, and what will you do to keep that watch? Where does it come from? How important is family? All of those things. I think that could work as a family movie. Um, my idea, and getting back a little bit to the idea of what is the movie at its core? What defines this? If you're going to remake it, what elements do you want to keep? And you took the approach of thinking about one of the storylines. One thing that I thought of that might be a family movie or family appropriate movie is like, what if we changed all of the specific storylines, but we kept the idea of these fractured storylines and brought it to like the school level. And I was just thinking, like,
Mm.
if you had these two friends are trying to go retrieve something that was taken from them, and it's that's a whole storyline of Jules and Vincent, but they're two friends, and the bully took something from them and they need to go get it from the bully, and it's or something like that.
Yeah,
You have maybe the Vincent and Mia storyline is just a boy and a girl, awkward sort of. They could go to the same diner, and it's a
yeah,
12-year old, something like that. Less heroin, but same diner. Um, and it could be, you could also incorporate some level of people are cheating on a test, and we're trying to get the answers to the test or something like that.
hmm
Something sort of edgy. But I think you could tell this kind of fractured storyline, different characters showing up in different stories in kind of a school kids setting, which uh, I'm not saying would be better than Pulp Fiction, but I think that could be. I haven't seen a kids movie take that kind of interesting story structure, and it also might just be.
yeah,
I mean, it could also be that kids aren't like going to be interested in telling watching a fractured story like that, or able to follow the
right.
story. But I think that could be an interesting option.
Yeah, the having it take place like at school and around school with kids that are teenagers, preteens. That would be an interesting way of doing it. Whether the audience being preteens, if they could follow that type of story structure, I think some if they did, they'd feel like, oh, this is really cool that they made a movie like this for me, you know.
Yeah,
But it'd be hard to pull off.
yeah. I mean, is I've seen a bunch of kids and family movies that are just so bad. Like they're not even. It's not that they're too formulaic. It's that they're failing to even follow the formula. And
Yeah.
still often my kids like it. And it's just you throw in a fun scene with this or that, and suddenly that's the kid's favorite movie. And so I say, if you're gonna if kids are gonna like a movie that's bad, why not go the other way and make a movie that's too good for kids, but
Good,
still but still throw them some bones.
yeah. I think that would work.
So what if they said we want to do this as no budget? And I was thinking about this, and I don't know. I won't say too much before I hear your take, but I was also wondering, because this was a no budget. It wasn't a no budget film, but it was a low budget independent film. I was also
Yeah.
wondering to think about this film. What if you
With like
went the opposite direction, and
bigger
what if
budget.
you had a huge budget for this? What would you then do with that huge budget?
That's what I was thinking too. Because this is pretty low budget. If you wanted to go lower, I mean, you probably get no name actors. You could keep this story though. I don't feel like there's anything in this story that's too. I mean, you got some shootouts and stuff, but I mean, this all feels doable on a low budget. But I was trying to think as well of like, if Tarantino was like, "Hey, we're giving you $200 million for this movie, and you can change it however you want," could he make it better? And there's a few things that I thought of like with a bigger budget, because I was when you watch these, like when the guns go off and like these fights, like it's not at the same level of like a Kill Bill. Like it's really not all that bloody at all, and like the special effects aren't amazingly great. Like I feel like Kill Bill was a whole nother level of just like the intensity and how these action scenes played out. I feel like you could do more with that if you had a little bit more of a budget to just make things feel more intense. I think he would add a lot more blood, a lot more like realness to it. That's missing from this one because it's really not. When you think of Tarantino, you're like, oh, it's going to be super bloody and crazy, and that's actually not that bloody in this movie. It's really more tamed down than his later stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you have $100 million fake blood budget, what would you do?
You could do it.
I was thinking, yeah, I was sort of thinking the really low budget version of this movie is Reservoir Dogs. And then
Oh,
it's,
yeah, that's a good
we're
point.
going to limit it to basically one location. And,
Hmm.
well, no, and then there's some flashbacks and stuff. But that I think that to me sort of is the example of how you do this on less of a budget, a similar kind of story. Um, but I was thinking, yeah, just in terms of like if you had a higher budget, I'd love to see the Star Wars Pulp Fiction, like, or if you do this, like Star Wars has branched out a little bit with the Mandalorian and with Andor, and a little bit
Hmm.
more interesting storylines than just the classic sort of hero's journey story. Which nothing against that classic hero's journey, but it's if you're going to keep making new Star Wars material, you don't want to just retell the same story over and over again. And so I do think if you did Pulp Fiction in space, that would be
Oh, yeah.
that could be an interesting take on it, and just sort of this kind of storyline. And Quentin Tarantino has built a universe that I guess is LA, but it's
Yeah.
his version of LA, and it could just as easily be on a space station, on a whole bunch of planets. It could be like he could just as easily have created a universe out somewhere in the universe, and
Hmm.
and we could be watching that on a much higher budget. And I don't think that would be an improvement on this film, but I do think taking some of this approach to storytelling might be an improvement on most of the big sci-fi films like that.
Hmm. It'd be fun to see a sci-fi movie like that built up like this. Yeah. Like if Tarantino did a Star Wars movie, for example.
Yeah.
Imagine what that would be like.
The other thing that I would also love to see is, there was an era of the sword and sandals movies,
Mm.
like Ben Hur and the Robe and all sorts of the Roman legions and whatnot. And then we had Gladiator. We've had some films over the years, but I think it would be a really fun. I don't know that there's an audience for this, but I would be interested in seeing a movie that, like, what if we saw the underworld of ancient Rome? And so we're not following the legions, we're not
Or
following Caesar, but this is the gangsters of ancient Rome, and we're going to be in that world. And I think that would be if you told that kind of approach with just a setting that we've never seen before with that kind of film. I think that would be really cool.
that'd be because it's like just same idea back in time. You could also do same idea forward in time, where it's like the future, like a Blade Runner like future. Like
Yeah.
imagine a Tarantino story taking place in the Blade Runner world. That could be really interesting too.
Yeah. Okay, what about TV show, 10-part Netflix series, or just sort of generally a TV version of this? What would you do?
I don't think you'd have to do much. I feel like just get his original script if it was 500 pages or something. Like these stories, I feel like you take one of these storylines and make it as an episode of TV, people will be like, that's one of the best episodes of TV ever made, and then you take the other one, and then by episode 5, you're seeing how they all intertwine, and you could set up all these different things and have them come back at the end, the last few episodes. I I don't know that that would be better necessarily, but I think he could do that and do it really, really well if he was like, going to expand on this world. I think it'd be really fun to see that.
Now, have you seen the Hateful Eight?
Yes. Yeah.
And because he also did a cut of that is longer and broken up into episodes. That
Oh, I don't think I've seen that version of it.
he did it. I watched some of it, and
Hmm.
I don't think it's as I didn't love the Hateful Eight compared to most of his other films.
No. Yeah.
Um, but it I didn't feel like the longer version, I didn't think added as much to it
As
as you
you
might have
think.
hoped. But I also think Hateful Eight isn't as good a film in my mind as Pulp Fiction. I think, and Pulp Fiction sets up a much bigger universe than,
Right.
so I think there's a lot more room to play in. Um, I also wonder though if you do it like, I think it would be so crazy if you did it as a sitcom, but with the violence.
Yeah.
Like instead of doing like the hour long, we're gonna, Breaking Bad is a little bit funny, but mostly it's a violent drama. If we instead did, this is Jules and Vincent, and they're talking about, Big Mac with cheese, but then they're also killing people every episode. I think
Hmm.
that I think that kind of humor, like I think that would be a really funny show that I've never seen before, where like we're gonna take this kind of content with a sense of humor to it, but still have it be just as violent. I guess Barry is a
Yeah.
show that has a lot of violence and comedy,
Comedy.
so it's
Yep.
not impossible. It's not unheard of. But I think sort of that approach would be a really interesting take on this.
Oh yeah. Because there is a lot of comedy to this. Like it is meant to be funny. Like the exaggeratedness of it is supposed to be funny in a way. That'd be really good. And maybe it'd be more if he had to contain himself to 30 minutes and something has to happen. You can't just, spread this out without anything happening. Maybe it'd be more fun. Like every episode, something crazy is going to happen. When is it going to be? How's it going to be? Because I was thinking of like Kill Bill. It's two movies. He had to make two movies out of the one. Like he can make these things longer. I don't think that's an issue for him.
Yeah.
So, and he's created these worlds. And of all the movies, like if you think of all of his movies, what world would you want to spend the most time in? I'm thinking like the Pulp Fiction world would be really interesting. There'd be so much you could do with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, would any of those be an actual improvement on the film itself?
I would probably say no. I think it's hard to. This is one of the great films of all time. What do you think?
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I really would love to see an ancient Rome crime movie. I think that
Yeah.
would be awesome. And I do think it'd be interesting to see, like, if you could make an amazing kid movie that then could be accessible to everybody. Because I would say my one caveat with Pulp Fiction is that I know a lot of people who would be so turned off by some of the content in the movie that
Hmm.
they just could not appreciate it as a great film. And so that's the one thing that I would say in terms of then how we rank this as a great work of cinema. I think absolutely in my mind it is one of the greatest films of all time, but most of the other great films of all time, I would say everyone should watch. And this is one where I think a lot of people just shouldn't watch
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
it.
you need to know going in. It's definitely the audience for this one is very limited compared to other great films of all time.
Yep. Yep. Well, great. Pulp Fiction. Don't watch it with your kids, but but if you've got the right expectations, I think this really is a great film. Uh, if you were gonna not rank all of his films, but what would you put as another one or two
Uh,
favorite Tarantino films?
for me, I feel like if I were to choose my favorite Tarantino, it would be Kill Bill. I feel like it's a
Mm.
much faster paced, a lot more action, really fun. That was also the first Tarantino I ever saw, and I went into it
Mm.
blind. I had no idea, and then I watched. I was like, "Oh wow, this is the best thing I've ever seen." But I would say Pulp Fiction's got to be for me in either two or three of his best movies ever. Where would you put it?
I mean, I probably put it as number one as his greatest
Yeah,
film of all time, but yeah, I guess I like Reservoir Dogs, which I think
agree.
it's such a contained movie. It's such a smaller movie, but I really think it does so well within those constraints. And then I really like Inglorious Basterds.
Yeah,
I, I think
that's a lot.
that's fun, and I think the fact that it plays with history in the way that it does is a really interesting approach. So that's another good one, I think.
Oh yeah, I'd have that one up there. I think an underrated one would be Jackie Brown. which is actually a really good movie that nobody really talks about when they talk about Tarantino. And I really liked that one. Really
It's
good.
just a lot less flashy, I think, than
Yeah.
like I think in the way that Pulp Fiction, too many people focus just on the flashy parts of it. I think
Right.
he maybe intentionally stripped down that flashiness for Jackie Brown,
Hmm.
and uh, and I think it still works as a movie, but I think that meant that a lot of people just paid a lot less attention to it.
Yeah. If you like the flashiness, then it's not there. But the storytelling is so good in that one. Without it's like he's showing I don't need to be flashy to tell an amazing story, and he
Yep.
does it. Yeah.
And there we have it. Thanks for joining us for this episode of How to Make Films and Influence People. Check us out at howtomakefilmspodcast.com, and we'll see you next time.